I'm happy to be here. It's a privilege for me to also participate at this conference. And as Harald was already introducing, mm, I was working for the Israel Allies Foundation, which is a globally active organization that worked very closely together with the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, which was the first caucus in a parliament where members of parliament were trying to get in touch with the Christian side from the Jewish side, and I was on the other side where parliamentarians from the nations wanted to get in touch with their Jewish counterparts in the Knesset, and so I was had the privilege to minister and serve both in the European Parliament in Brussels as well as in Berlin in the Bundestag, and that really was an interesting thing. The topic and issue that I want to speak about today is the anti-Semitism that we see among the nations. Mostly I will focus on the European nations, and I want to try to build the connection and the bridge between what we heard from David, what we heard from the French couple who spoke earlier today about the historic anti-Semitism and the connection of the anti-Semitism in the time of Theodor Herzl that led to the creation of the Zionist movement, and the function that anti-Semitism today has, in my understanding. And let me start with saying that Zionism, really at its heart, is about one special place called Zion, which is one location in Jerusalem, and it's the Temple Mount. And if we're quite honest, and I know we're all idealists, which is good because we have faith, but if we're quite honest and we look at the facts, then we need to say that Zionism hasn't reached its ultimate goal yet. Because even when the State of Israel was established or re-established in 1948, and even when they took the Temple Mount in 1967, and even although the Temple Mount is part of the sovereign state of Israel, and Israel is the sovereign over the Temple Mount, they don't use that sovereignty, but they have handed over that sovereignty over that crucial part of the state of Israel to the Arabs, to the Jordanians and the Palestinians. And so the heart of Zionism is missing. And it's my total belief that without the Temple Mount, the restoration of the Jewish people is impossible. Because we see that Abraham and Isaac on Mount Moriah met the Lord, who revealed himself as the provider, as the one who provides for Isaac not to be sacrificed, who has the answer and who has the solution. And I think that on this mountain, it is where he will reveal himself to Israel once more. I don't have the time to go into detail from a biblical perspective about the restoration of the Jewish people, where I think the Temple Mount will be quite instrumental, and also the temple. But I want to just very briefly show, and we were mentioning it already briefly during that conference, that just a few days ago, actually, probably it was 2 weeks ago, we had this heightened tension around the Temple Mount. You remember when there was this terror attack and two Israeli policemen who weren't even Jewish but Druze were shot on the Temple Mount by terrorists, and Israel, in reaction to this, installed metal detectors on the Temple Mount in order to be able to protect that area from the infiltration of weapons, because they had even automatic machine guns brought and smuggled onto the Temple Mount with which they killed those policemen. And as a result, and as a reaction, Israel put up those metal detectors and came under immense pressure, international pressure, because of this. And there was this whole kind of pressure mounting on the Israeli government to give back the Temple Mount and to because they didn't allow, for the first time since 67, they didn't allow on a Friday the Muslims to pray in Al-Aqsa Mosque. And what we need to understand is that there is Zionism today working and building momentum, and there is anti-Zionism working and building momentum. And both are fighting for one place and one place alone, and this is Zion. And on Zion, we have two buildings that are in a contradiction, and that cannot be there at the same time, and it's Al-Aqsa Mosque and the temple. It can be either or, but not both. And this is why we see in our times political, religious confrontation between the forces that cling to Al-Aqsa Mosque and those forces that cling to the Jewish temple, and who rightly claim that there was a Jewish temple on the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount belongs to Israel. Israel has every right to the Temple Mount, and they should be entitled to the Temple Mount again. And those two sides, those two forces are on a direct collision course, and we see it before our very eyes that these two forces are fighting each other right now. What has this to do with anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism? Let me try to explain. There was a few years ago in 2016, a Jewish rabbi, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who was the chief rabbi in Great Britain. And he was invited to the European Parliament to hold a talk about the future of Jewish communities in Europe and about anti-Semitism. And that was a great talk. Whoever understands English, I encourage you to go to YouTube and to Google Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, European Parliament, and to watch this session that he held, because it was incredible. And he really had a good grasp of anti-Semitism, and I tried to explain it in a nutshell. What he was saying is that anti-Semitism, like a virus, in order to survive, had to mutate. And the anti-Semitism in the Middle Ages was a Christian anti-Semitism and was based on the highest authority of that time, and that was religion. So the anti-Semitism of the time in the Middle Ages drew its power from calling upon religion in order to look down on the Jews and to deny the Jews' basic rights. Then came the 1930s, and anti-Semitism mutated, and it called upon the highest authority of that time, and that was science. And so they created some kind of, not real scientific, but pseudo-scientific, race-based anti-Semitism. And they hated the Jews for being an unclean race. And after the Holocaust, after the Shoah, and after the murder of more than 6 million Jews, that kind of anti-Semitism was totally unacceptable socially and in the European circles. And there was this never again, and rightfully so. So anti-Semitism, in order to be acceptable, had to mutate again. And Rabbi Sachs says that today, as before, anti-Semitism today calls upon the highest moral authority of our time, and in our time, the highest moral authority are human rights. And so the anti-Semitism today is not about the Jewish religion, it's not about the Jewish race, but it's about the Jewish state. And the authority they call upon and they refer to is human rights. And what they do is, he says, Israel, as the only functioning democracy in the Middle East, is regularly accused of the 5 cardinal sins against human rights: racism, apartheid, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and attempted genocide. And we see that same functioning of anti-Semitism today is directly mutated against the Jewish state. There's only one Jewish state in the world today. And anti-Semitism today is against the Jewish state. If someone in Europe would stand up and say, I hate Jews, everyone would stand up and say, you're a racist, you're an anti-Semite. But if they stand up and say, I hate settlers because they kill all the Palestinians, then that's totally acceptable. We hear it on the streets in Europe again. The same kind of hatred, it's the same spirit, it's the same language. It just uses different vocabulary. But today, it's anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism. In Germany, just this year, the German Bundestag made a survey. They had specialists and experts doing a survey, and they were looking into the German public and were looking for anti-Semitic tropes within the German public. And they found out that up until 40% of Germans today hold anti-Zionist views. 40% of Germans hold anti-Zionist views. This means, I think Germany has learned one lesson out of the Shoah, and the old 1930s anti-Semitism they fight against, and they do that really. But the new kind of mutated virus is not detected by the German society's immune system. And it's anti-Zionism, and we don't see it. The Germans don't see it as a threat. They don't see it as a virus. And the same is true for most of the other European countries. Actually, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, in 2015 did a survey globally, and they in particular focused on Europe. And they said that the three most anti-Semitic countries in Europe today, that was 2015, were first and foremost France, second Greece, and third Spain. And they said that among these countries, the levels of anti-Semitism were quite high. And they found out something else, which is very interesting. They said that there's the natural population, and then we have the Muslim population within these countries. And the levels of anti-Semitism amongst the Muslim population within these countries is 3 times higher than the anti-Semitism amongst the natural population of these countries. Now we see that this anti-Semitism has already started to become violent again. You know, there's anti-Semitism that issues itself in words. And this is spreading, especially in the social media. And it's crazy. It's crazy. In social media, anti-Semitism reaches crazy levels. But there is this barrier that people not easily step over, which is to actually start to violently express their anti-Semitism. And we saw recently in the past years several terror attacks that had an anti-Semitic motivation behind them. Just to remind you, we had the Toulouse shooting in France. We had when the Charlie Hebdo terror attack in Paris took place, there was also the shooting in the Hyper Caché. That was a Jewish kosher supermarket. Despite Obama at that time totally denying any anti-Semitic motivation behind the terror attack, it was clearly an act of anti-Semitism, the shooting in the supermarket. Then we had the terror attack in Brussels, where someone with a Kalashnikov entered the Jewish museum in Brussels and shot, I think it was 2 people. And then we had the shooting in the Bataclan, which even less people deem as an anti-Semitic incident. But you need to know that the prior owners of the Bataclan, they had a clear pro-Israel stance, and regularly they had pro-Israel events in the Bataclan. So we can read in several circles about it that also there we can think. It's not proven, but it's well probable that there's an anti-Semitic motivation behind that one as well. So we see already that this kind of anti-Semitism is already beginning to become violent again in Europe. And at the same time that these violent expressions of anti-Semitism start to come, we see the levels of Aliyah from these nations rising parallelly. So today, France has the second highest rate of Jews that make Aliyah and go back to Israel globally. So after behind the Ukraine, France is number 2. And those were, like Dreyfus, assimilated Jews mostly. Those were not the ultra-Orthodox. Those are mainly assimilated Jews. But they feel they don't have a future in Europe anymore. Now, you know what happened in Barcelona recently. And in the aftermath of the Barcelona attack, the rabbi of Barcelona stood up and said, I tell the participants of my congregation, we don't have a future, sell your property, buy property in Israel, make Aliyah. Europe is lost. That were his words. I quote it because it's very strong words that he uses. He says, this place is lost, he warns, adding, don't repeat the mistakes of Algerian Jews or Venezuelan Jews. Better get out early than late. Europe is lost. That were his words. And you need to know that in Spain, since 2007, the Muslim population doubled in size. Since 2007, the Muslim population in Spain doubled in size. Only this year, from January to July, we had 3 times as much illegal immigrants as in the whole 2016. 3 times as much. We see at the Spanish-Moroccan border, we see violent attempts to cross the border. They attack the border of Spain in order to intrude into Spain and into Europe. We see that after the Charlie Hebdo attack, the French authorities had a crackdown on Islamism in their country, and most of the Islamists fled to Spain. And also that they have a problem of homegrown terrorists. So there are people who become Muslims, Spanish people who become Muslims, and one of them, he led a terror cell. He was they put him in jail a while ago, and he was planning to bomb a Jewish bookstore in Barcelona as well. Now, I just want to try to show some of the forces that are moving in Europe today, because the anti-Semitism, what it does in Europe at the moment, is 2 things. First, it actually forces the Jews out, and they make Aliyah. And European leaders have been warning against it for a long time, and they say the moment that the European Jews will leave Europe, Europe will not be Europe anymore. And I think they're right. At the same time, we know also that God gathers the Jews, and it is his will that they gather. And we see also from Jeremiah that he uses both fishermen and hunters. I'm not speaking for anti-Semitism. I'm just saying that this anti-Semitism already now is driving people out of Europe, and they go towards Israel. And I tell you something even more incredible, something which nobody would have ever thought possible. It's happening in the US. or it's in the preparation stage in the US. The levels of anti-Semitism openly expressed in the United States of America are on a record high, and both on the left and on the right. I don't know whether you have seen it, but after the election, and you know Hillary Clinton lost big time, which is very good for Israel, and very important also for us as Christians. And after the loss of Clinton, the Democratic Party chose a new leader. And there were two options. The one person who became actually the leader. And the second option was the only Muslim US congressman that we have, a guy named Keith Ellison. Keith Ellison is an absolute anti-Semite. He's an absolute hater of Israel, and he is a supporter of several terrorist organizations doing things against Israel like Hamas and Hezbollah. And he had very good chances of becoming the chairman of the Democratic Party in the US. The levels of violent anti-Semitism at US universities are so high that Jewish students cannot show themselves publicly as being Jewish students anymore in America. When you have pro-Israel events and speakers, the radical left will turn up and they will shred the place to pieces. They will create such chaos and havoc that the police will have to move in to take out the speaker to rescue him, and the event will be canceled. And it's not happening once or twice. This is happening on a regular basis on campuses throughout America right now. And you know that America has the highest diaspora of Jews at the moment. And I'm just telling this because we need to see that God is really moving to move the Jews back into Israel, and Aliyah will take on record levels because anti-Semitism is on the rise. There's a second thing which relates to what Harald was saying about the nations. And this is the new mutated virus of anti-Semitism is grasping and is holding the nations captive. And we see nation after nation being infected from that virus of anti-Zionism. And it's incredible to see. And to see what is happening. I would have never thought that would have been possible. Really. To see that a German government knows that its taxpayers' money goes into funding terrorists among the Palestinians who blow themselves up or who kill Jews. They receive a salary in prison. Their families get money, and we pay for it. And they know it, and they don't do a thing against it. Switzerland does it. France does it. The Spanish do it. Actually, you know, Barcelona, in 2016, Spain provided 5.1 million euros to organizations directly related to terrorism against Israelis. 5.1 million. Out of those 5.1 million, 5% came from the city council of Barcelona. See what they have sown and see what they have reaped. And this is something that we really need to stand up against. We cannot be silent about our nation sponsoring Palestinians and killing Jews. But this is what is happening right now. And let me try to show something else that we have. Anti-Semitism has three main bases in our societies. There's the anti-Semitism on the right, which is normally in Europe, and this works quite well, publicly condemned every time it keeps its head up. Every time it appears anywhere, the European society will condemn right-wing anti-Semitism. This works well, but it still exists. Then we have anti-Semitism on the left, It will never be tackled in Europe. Politicians will defend it. Politicians will do everything in their power to not having to deal with it, because they will face an uproar from the media, which is very liberal and very left-wing. They will fight against the academia, which is also very left-wing. They will fight against multiple forces in society that they just don't want to fight with, and this is why they will not say anything about against the anti-Semitism on the left, and it's the strongest. Europe-wide, worldwide, it's the strongest force, especially among non-governmental organizations. And then there is another component, which is Muslim anti-Semitism. And Europe has just taken in millions of anti-Semitic, Israel-hating Muslims. And it's not even something that, I mean, we can understand. If you grow up in a society like in Syria, for example, that's what you learn. You get that from as a child in school, in the kindergartens. This is what they teach them. You can see testimonies now that the Israelis started to treat Syrians from across the border who were wounded, and for the first time Syrians recognized, you're not monsters. I thought you were monsters, because they have been raised up in that spirit. And so this is what they naturally take with the mother milk. And we have them in the millions in Europe. And so we need to see that there are those three. And then there is something which is very important, I feel, that this anti-Semitism and this anti-Zionism in particular leads Europe to politically oppose Israel every step of the way that Israel tries to get into the ways of the Lord. Every time God tries to restore Israel, bring Israel back to its own culture, to its own country, to its own God, to the Temple Mount, to Hebron, to Shechem, to Jerusalem, there's an uproar in the international community, led by the anti-Zionists in the international community. And you can see that in the UN, within the last year, 1.5 years, several resolutions condemning Israel for keeping or for saying and claiming the land that they possess and own legally. And we see the UNESCO has said Hebron is not Jewish. They said Jerusalem is not Jewish. The UNESCO even issued a resolution in which Jerusalem was not even mentioned as a name, only Al-Quds. And you know, this is what we need to understand. There's a fight between the narrative of the Muslims and the narrative of us Christians and Jews. There's a fight between the narrative of lie and the narrative of truth. And Jerusalem is through and through Jewish. It is, was, and will be. Amen? It's not Al-Quds, it's Jerusalem. It's the city of the great king. And they have Al-Quds rallies throughout Europe every year, sponsored by Iran. And we have Hezbollah members and terrorists and leftists marching together through the streets in Berlin every year. And they cried. Even this year they cried in London. They said it again, death to the Jews. You hear the same cry, the same battle cry. And it's sponsored by Iran. Our politicians don't do anything against it. We need to have Jerusalem marches. Why should there only be Al-Quds marches? There should be Jerusalem marches in every capital in Europe. Now we should say Jerusalem is ours. It's Christian. It belongs to us. It's European. We as Europeans love Jerusalem and we support Jerusalem of being a Jewish city. And our civilization receives its values and blessings from Jerusalem. So we as Europeans love Jerusalem. And we see Jerusalem as a place that belongs rightly to the Jews and to the state of Israel. And we should make that public. And we need to bring it to the streets. Because if we don't, they do it yearly, and it does something. So I just wanted to try to show that anti-Zionism today tries, first there's this part of driving the Jews back to to their homeland, to Israel, like 120 years ago. And the vision of Herzl is still correct and fitting, even for our times. Unfortunately, because it means we haven't learned our lesson. Our countries haven't learned the lesson. Because if the Jews have to flee, it means we don't give them the right to live and exist as Jews in freedom. And this is our shame. But at the same time, anti-Zionism tries to achieve something else. And it tries to keep the Jews from becoming thoroughly Jewish, from embracing the Bible and the truth of the Bible. Because every time they do, European politicians will stand up and condemn them. If an Israeli goes back and based on the promises that God gave to Isaac, to Abram, to Jacob, and purchases a plot of land and builds a home in the White House, the president, not this one, thanks God, but his predecessor at least, stood up and every time condemned it. They don't have anything to do in Washington. No problems in the world except for a Jewish person building a home. They don't have a problem with Palestinians murdering Jews, but if a Jew builds a home, that's a big problem. And anti-Zionism tries to keep the Jews from building the state of Israel. And we need to also find a narrative against that. This is why what Harald said in Jeremiah 31 is very important. We have to proclaim it, that the God of Israel is bringing them back to their land. It's their land. They have a right to be there. They have ownership. It's legal. It's not illegal, but it's legal. They should do it, and we should stand on their side, by their side, support them, and fight against anti-Semitism for the sake of Israel and for the sake of our nation. And we need to see that the modern anti-Semitism works against the state of Israel. And so we as Christians really need to learn the narrative how to defend Israel in a political language, how to defend them in the broader public sphere, how to defend them in the social media, how to defend them in newspapers. We like Herzl need to learn to take it out of our churches. If we fail to take it out of our churches, we will fail miserably. We can pray for Israel and Jerusalem, and we shall pray for Israel and Jerusalem. But we also need to do something active to bring it to the streets and to do something against it, about it, and for it. Against anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, and for Zion, for Jerusalem. This is the only way that we can move forward. And this way, we can work together with God for his ultimate purpose of giving back the Temple Mount to the Jews, of having a temple there and not a mosque, and of bringing and ushering in a new season and a new age. And this will start in Jerusalem.
Well, thank you so much, Josias, for this brilliant presentation. We'll have a break now, afternoon break. I'm not sure, Michael, is something to be announced?
Thank you, Josias. That was very interesting. So yeah, we have a coffee break now. We're going to do it about 25 minutes, I think, just until 4:30 p.m. There's going to be free coffee and drinks and cakes and cookies again. Donations are welcome, but you don't have to give anything. You can keep the headsets during this break. You don't have to give them up, but then give them up again in the evening. So, but for now, just keep them, and then afterwards, they continue. Just for your information, all of this is being recorded and can be ordered. You have these cards in your welcome packages. If anyone did not receive a welcome package in the brown bags, then just come out to the desk and we'll give you one.